When Staff Sergeant Maya Chen eliminated a high-value terrorist target with a single Hellfire missile through a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in the theater, she proved that the deadliest weapons are sometimes operated by the soldiers everyone considers unfit for real combat. The strike came after 72 hours of institutional resistance from commanders who believed that former infantry medics lacked the killer instinct required for precision drone operations. But 3 months before that impossible shot changed everything, they still called her just a support specialist and meant it as a dismissal. The duty roster at Creech Air Force Base told Maya everything she needed to know about her place in the unmanned aerial systems hierarchy. Her name appeared permanently under training operations and maintenance support, printed in small letters beneath the combat pilots who flew the actual missions that mattered. While Air Force officers commanded the Predator and Reaper drones that hunted high-value targets across 3 continents, Maya calibrated sensors and ran diagnostic tests on equipment that others operated during the operations that earned commendations and promotions. She'd been doing it for 6 months now, watching Academy graduates rotate through combat assignments while she accumulated endless hours of what the brass considered technical support rather than actual warfare. Maya had completed 2 combat deployments as an Army medic before transitioning to drone operations, had saved 17 lives under direct enemy fire, and possessed an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics that came from years of treating casualties while mortars fell around aid stations. None of it mattered when assignment boards saw her medical corps background and automatically classified her as support personnel unsuited for the psychological demands of remote killing operations. The morning briefing room at Creech buzzed with the usual pre-shift energy. Pilots clustered around coffee stations and mission displays, reviewing intelligence updates and discussing targets that required elimination across multiple time zones. Maya sat in her assigned section, the area reserved for technical specialists, studying sensor calibration data with the kind of obsessive attention that combat operators dismissed as typical support behavior from people who'd never pulled triggers in actual firefights. Her maintenance coveralls bore none of the patches that marked elite units or successful combat missions. No pilot wings, no distinguished warfare insignia, just basic technical specialist ratings and a name tape that most officers in the facility couldn't connect to any significant operational contributions. Maya had learned to be invisible in a profession where visibility often determined career advancement, where being overlooked was preferable to being noticed for questioning decisions made by people with higher security clearances. She spread her technical manuals across the metal workspace, annotating system specifications and operational parameters with meticulous precision. Intelligence reports indicated increased terrorist activity around several target areas, and Maya tracked every equipment malfunction, every instance of sensor failure, every piece of technical data that might affect drone operations in contested airspace. It was information that could enhance mission effectiveness, but nobody asked maintenance specialists for tactical input on combat operations. Colonel Marcus Richardson emerged from the operations center with his customary authority, commanding attention through presence that had been cultivated during 20 years of Air Force service. His flight suit was immaculate, every patch perfectly positioned, every detail reflecting the standards expected from officers who made life-and-death decisions from climate-controlled facilities thousands of miles from actual battlefields. Richardson had flown F-15s before transitioning to unmanned systems, and he carried himself like someone who understood the difference between real pilots who'd experienced aerial combat and technicians who simply maintained equipment for others to operate. He paused at Maya's workstation, his eyes scanning her calibration reports with the kind of casual assessment reserved for paperwork that wouldn't influence important operational decisions. "Chen," he said, his tone carrying that particular inflection officers used when addressing personnel they considered functionally interchangeable. "I see you're still buried in technical specifications. Hope all that documentation doesn't interfere with keeping our systems operational for the people who actually fly these missions." Maya looked up from her manuals, her steady gaze meeting his without showing the frustration that had been building for months. "Just ensuring optimal sensor performance for today's operations, sir. The targeting systems require precise calibration for accuracy at extended ranges." Richardson sipped his coffee, making her wait for his response in the kind of power demonstration that reminded everyone about rank differentials and operational hierarchies. The thing about equipment maintenance, Chen, is that it's pretty straightforward when you follow established procedures. The real challenges come from making split-second combat decisions that determine mission success or failure. Decisions that require experience most technical personnel don't possess. The comment drew knowing looks from nearby officers, the kind of casual dismissal that maintained hierarchical boundaries without crossing lines that might trigger formal complaints. Maya felt the familiar weight of institutional marginalization. The sense that her combat experience and technical expertise were viewed as adequate for support roles but insufficient for positions that required real responsibility and tactical judgment. "Yes, sir," she replied carefully, maintaining professional composure despite her growing awareness that her capabilities were being systematically underutilized. "Just want to ensure mission-critical systems perform reliably when operators need them most. Equipment that's calibrated to support the same objectives it's been supporting for months," Richardson said, stepping closer with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned about decisions that affected operational outcomes. "These aren't exactly complex targets we're tracking, Chen. Standard surveillance operations, routine data collection, maybe some low-priority reconnaissance missions. The kind of technical work that functions perfectly well when people stick to their designated responsibilities rather than trying to expand beyond their actual qualifications." Maya nodded once, her expression neutral despite her intimate knowledge of the targets Richardson was describing as routine. She'd been studying intelligence reports during her off-duty hours, tracking patterns in terrorist communications and movement that suggested coordinated planning for major operations against civilian targets. Her analysis indicated that several supposedly low-priority surveillance subjects were actually key coordinators in a network that was planning something significant and imminent. Richardson moved on to brief the combat pilots, his voice carrying renewed authority as he discussed missions that actually required strategic thinking and tactical expertise. Maya remained at her workstation, studying technical specifications that would be dismissed as irrelevant by people who'd never understood that equipment performance often determined the difference between successful operations and catastrophic intelligence failures. The drone maintenance hangar echoed with the familiar sounds of pre-flight preparation. Maya walked the length of her assigned Predator, conducting visual inspections with systematic thoroughness that had been drilled into her during Army medical training, where attention to detail meant the difference between soldiers living or dying from preventable equipment failures. Every sensor array, every communication antenna, every component that could malfunction during critical operations received careful examination. Her technical partner, Airman First Class Jessica Torres, worked alongside her with professional competence that came from understanding that inadequate maintenance could compromise missions that affected national security in ways they might never fully comprehend. "Bird's looking perfect, Sergeant," Torres reported, closing the sensor housing after completing her inspection checklist. "All systems showing green across the board, communication links tested and verified, payload systems armed and ready according to today's mission profile. Should be another standard surveillance run." Maya nodded, appreciating Torres's thoroughness even as she noted the automatic assumption that any mission involving maintenance personnel would necessarily be routine and unchallenging. Nothing was routine in asymmetric warfare environments where enemies adapted constantly to exploit weaknesses in systems and procedures that hadn't evolved to address emerging threats and changing tactical situations. The pattern recognition began during Maya's third month at Creech, starting with anomalies and surveillance footage that most analysts dismissed as coincidental background activity. She noticed vehicles appearing in multiple locations across different time zones, following movement patterns that suggested coordination rather than random civilian traffic. The same faces appeared in crowds at markets, transportation hubs, and religious gatherings, in cities separated by thousands of miles. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya spent her off-duty hours analyzing archived footage, cross-referencing facial recognition data with travel patterns and communication intercepts that painted a picture of systematic preparation for coordinated attacks. What she discovered kept her awake during sleep periods, studying intelligence reports under the harsh lighting of her quarters, while trying to understand the scope of what appeared to be a multinational terrorist operation. Intelligence summaries described the subjects as low-level facilitators engaged in routine support activities for established networks. Individual surveillance reports characterized their movements as typical patterns for people involved in legitimate business activities that occasionally intersected with persons of interest to counterterrorism agencies. But Maya's analysis revealed systematic coordination that transcended the capabilities of minor players in established organizations. She cross-referenced communication metadata with transportation schedules and discovered that the surveillance subjects were using commercial travel to conduct reconnaissance of potential targets while maintaining communication protocols that suggested professional operational security training. Airport security footage showed the same individuals conducting what appeared to be timing studies of screening procedures and passenger flow patterns at major international terminals. Maya pulled archived surveillance footage onto her workstation during maintenance periods, studying behavioral patterns with the analytical intensity she'd once applied to treating battlefield casualties, where missing subtle symptoms could result in soldiers dying from conditions that should have been treatable. The subjects demonstrated counter-surveillance awareness that indicated professional training, varying their routes and schedules according to patterns that would defeat routine monitoring efforts. Satellite imagery revealed meetings at locations that provided optimal security against electronic surveillance, remote sites where participants could gather without triggering automated detection systems that monitored more obvious locations. Recent photographs showed the same vehicles and personnel appearing at multiple sites across a geographic area that spanned several countries, suggesting coordination that required significant resources and sophisticated planning capabilities. Maya compiled her analysis into a comprehensive intelligence assessment, documenting patterns that indicated imminent execution of coordinated attacks against civilian aviation targets. The evidence was compelling to anyone willing to examine it systematically, but she understood from institutional experience that systematic analysis from maintenance personnel would likely be dismissed as exceeding appropriate responsibilities and demonstrating fundamental misunderstanding of intelligence evaluation procedures. The base intelligence section occupied a secure facility that required special clearance for access by personnel whose duties normally didn't involve classified analysis activities. Maya requested a meeting with the duty intelligence officer, carrying her analysis in a folder that represented weeks of after-hours work and growing certainty that routine surveillance subjects were actually coordinating major terrorist operations. Major Patricia Hawkins emerged from her office with the expression of someone managing multiple high-priority tasks while dealing with interruptions from personnel who didn't understand the complexity of intelligence operations or the sensitivity of information that required careful handling by specially trained professionals. Sergeant Chen, Hawkins said without enthusiasm, checking her schedule with obvious impatience. "What can I do for you today?" Maya handed over her analysis, watching Hawkins scan the executive summary with the kind of rapid assessment that suggested predetermined conclusions about the value of input from technical specialists. "Ma'am, I've identified coordination patterns among several surveillance subjects that suggest preparation for major operations against civilian aviation targets. The timing and geographic distribution indicate imminent execution of coordinated attacks that could result in significant casualties if not interdicted." Hawkins flipped through the analysis with cursory attention that indicated professional skepticism about conclusions reached by personnel who lacked formal intelligence training and access to classified information sources that provided context unavailable to maintenance specialists working with limited datasets. "This is interesting work, Sergeant, but intelligence analysis requires specialized training and security clearances that allow access to information sources beyond what's available to technical personnel. We have analysts who monitor these subjects using resources that provide a complete operational picture rather than isolated observations." "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, maintaining professional tone despite her frustration with institutional assumptions about analytical capabilities. "But I've been observing systematic patterns that suggest coordination beyond routine surveillance assessments. The subjects are conducting reconnaissance that appears designed to support simultaneous operations." Hawkins closed the folder and returned it with a slight smile that didn't convey any genuine appreciation for Maya's efforts. "Sergeant, pattern recognition is more complex than it appears to people who haven't been trained in intelligence methodology. What looks like coordination might actually be coincidental activity that happens to occur in similar geographic areas without representing actual operational collaboration." Maya felt the familiar frustration of expertise being dismissed by people who'd never spent years observing human behavior under combat stress, where pattern recognition could mean the difference between anticipating enemy actions and being surprised by attacks that killed people who depended on accurate threat assessment. "Ma'am, respectfully, these patterns show systematic preparation for attacks against aviation targets. The subjects have conducted reconnaissance at multiple airports while maintaining communication protocols that indicate professional operational security training." Sergeant Hawkins said, her voice taking on the patient tone used when addressing persistent subordinates who didn't understand their limitations. Maintenance personnel see suspicious activity everywhere, because that's what maintenance personnel do when they start thinking beyond their actual responsibilities. Intelligence professionals who analyze these threats have training and resources that go far beyond equipment calibration and system maintenance. The dismissal was absolute, despite being delivered with bureaucratic politeness. Hawkins shifted toward her office door, while holding Maya's folder like it represented misguided initiative from someone who'd fundamentally misunderstood her role in the intelligence community, and the boundaries that separated technical support from analytical responsibilities that required formal training and appropriate security clearances. Maya returned to her quarters with her intelligence assessment intact and her warnings unheeded. She spread the surveillance photographs across her desk again, studying facial recognition matches and travel patterns with renewed urgency. The evidence had become even more compelling when viewed as a complete operational picture, showing clear progression of terrorist coordination that was building towards simultaneous attacks against multiple civilian aviation targets. She opened her laptop and began updating her threat assessment, incorporating new intelligence that had become available since her meeting with Major Hawkins. 3 more incidents had been reported in the past week. Airport security at Frankfurt had detained individuals conducting suspicious photography of screening procedures. A Delta Airlines flight had reported unusual passenger behavior during boarding at Atlanta's international terminal, and customs officials at Heathrow had flagged travel documents that appeared to be sophisticated forgeries designed to facilitate movement of operatives between target countries. The pattern was accelerating, building toward operational execution that would overwhelm the scattered security measures designed to detect individual threats rather than coordinated network activities. Maya pulled out her analysis charts and began marking new connections with different colored pens, creating a tactical picture that revealed systematic preparation for attacks that would fundamentally change aviation security protocols worldwide. The terrorist network had effectively positioned operatives at multiple international airports with overlapping operational timelines, turning routine air travel into potential catastrophe scenarios for passengers who believed they were flying through secure transportation systems protected by adequate intelligence gathering and threat assessment procedures. Maya attempted to present her updated analysis the following morning, requesting another meeting with intelligence personnel through her immediate supervisor, Technical Sergeant Rodriguez. The maintenance section buzzed with routine activity as specialists prepared systems for daily operations that would span multiple theaters and time zones, conducting surveillance missions that commanders assumed would continue providing actionable intelligence without significant operational complications. Rodriguez listened to Maya's concerns with professional attention while maintaining the skeptical expression of someone who understood institutional boundaries and the potential consequences of subordinates exceeding their designated responsibilities within carefully structured organizational hierarchies. "Chen, I understand you're concerned about what you're seeing in surveillance footage," Rodriguez said after reviewing her updated documentation. "But intelligence analysis isn't really our lane. We maintain equipment, ensure operational readiness, and support mission execution by keeping systems functional for the people who actually conduct strategic analysis and tactical operations." The response reflected standard institutional thinking about role separation and specialization, assumptions that technical expertise couldn't overlap with analytical capabilities, and that pattern recognition required formal training rather than experience-based observation skills developed through years of combat exposure and casualty treatment under hostile fire. Sergeant Maya began carefully, recognizing the need to present her concerns without appearing to challenge established hierarchies or suggest that maintenance personnel possessed capabilities that overlapped with intelligence specialties. "The subjects I've been tracking are conducting systematic reconnaissance that indicates professional training and coordination beyond what routine surveillance assessments have identified." Rodriguez reviewed her charts with the attention of someone trying to understand subordinate concerns while remaining aware of institutional expectations about maintaining appropriate boundaries between technical support functions and intelligence analysis responsibilities that require different types of training and security clearances. "Have you tried presenting this through intelligence channels?" Rodriguez asked, already knowing the answer but following procedures that required documentation of attempts to address concerns through appropriate organizational pathways before considering alternative approaches to problematic situations. "Yes, Sergeant." Major Hawkins reviewed my analysis and indicated that intelligence professionals have access to information sources that provide more complete operational pictures than what's available to maintenance personnel. She suggested that pattern recognition requires specialized training that technical specialists don't possess. Rodriguez nodded with understanding that reflected his own experience with institutional responses to suggestions from personnel who weren't recognized as qualified to contribute analytical insights that might contradict assessments made by people with appropriate credentials and formal responsibility for intelligence evaluation activities. Maya tried a different approach during the following week, requesting an informal consultation with the Base Psychological Services Office about stress-related concerns that might be affecting her ability to maintain appropriate focus on assigned responsibilities rather than becoming distracted by intelligence matters outside her area of expertise. Captain Rebecca Morrison listened to Maya's presentation with clinical attention, taking notes as Maya described her analysis of terrorist coordination and her growing certainty that major attacks were imminent. Morrison maintained professional composure while internally assessing whether Maya's concerns represented legitimate intelligence observations or symptoms of deployment-related stress that could affect her ability to perform technical duties effectively. "This is certainly detailed analysis, Sergeant," Morrison said after reviewing Maya's documentation. "But I'm wondering if your concerns might indicate excessive investment in intelligence matters that aren't really your responsibility. Technical personnel sometimes develop hypervigilance about threats when they feel underutilized or disconnected from operational significance." Maya recognized the shift from intelligence evaluation to psychological assessment, another institutional mechanism for addressing personnel who raised concerns that contradicted official assessments or challenged the competence of people responsible for intelligence analysis and threat evaluation within established organizational structures. "Ma'am, respectfully, this analysis is based on objective observation of systematic patterns that indicate coordinated preparation for major terrorist operations. The evidence shows professional operational security training and sophisticated coordination capabilities that suggest imminent execution of planned attacks." Morrison studied Maya with the analytical approach of someone trained to identify stress indicators in military personnel operating under conditions that could affect judgment and decision-making capabilities. Extended exposure to intelligence materials without formal training in analytical methodology can create situations where personnel see significance in random events that don't actually represent coordinated threats. The conversation had effectively transformed Maya's intelligence concerns into a psychological profile, reducing her professional observations to symptoms of role dissatisfaction and inadequate understanding of her appropriate responsibilities within the intelligence community. Morrison recommended counseling sessions to help Maya develop better focus on her assigned technical duties without becoming distracted by analytical activities that exceeded her training and security clearance levels. Maya left the Psychological Services Office understanding that every official channel had systematically dismissed her concerns, while reframing them as evidence of personal inadequacy or professional boundary confusion. Her warnings had been transformed into symptoms that required treatment rather than intelligence that demanded action. Institutional responses that prioritized organizational stability over threat assessment accuracy. She walked back to her quarters through the desert heat, carrying intelligence analysis that documented imminent terrorist attacks but had been systematically dismissed by every level of command authority. The terrorist network continued their operational preparations, while the people responsible for detecting and preventing those operations convinced themselves that the threats were imaginary, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that a maintenance specialist had identified patterns that professional intelligence officers had failed to recognize. Maya retreated into solitary preparation, working through scenarios that everyone else refused to acknowledge as legitimate possibilities. Her quarters became an unofficial intelligence center, walls covered with photographs and charts annotated in multiple colors to track terrorist movements and target analysis that revealed systematic preparation for coordinated attacks against civilian aviation infrastructure. She cross-referenced terrorist communication patterns with airport security schedules, understanding that successful coordination required precise timing that would maximize the impact of simultaneous operations while minimizing the possibility of detection through routine security procedures that weren't designed to address professional terrorist networks with sophisticated operational capabilities. The night shifts provided sanctuary where Maya could work without attracting attention from personnel who'd already classified her as problematic for exceeding appropriate boundaries between technical support and intelligence analysis. She studied every piece of information that became available through routine channels, searching for confirmations of patterns she'd identified while official assessments continued to dismiss terrorist coordination as coincidental activity. Equipment requisition forms revealed which overseas installations were requesting upgraded communication systems. Maintenance reports documented unusual electromagnetic interference that suggested sophisticated jamming equipment being tested near sensitive facilities. Security incident reports described surveillance activities at multiple airports that individually appeared routine but collectively indicated systematic reconnaissance efforts by professionally trained operatives. Maya began modifying her personal equipment loadout, adding capabilities that weren't standard for maintenance personnel but could prove essential if her analysis proved accurate, and she found herself in situations that required more than technical knowledge to address effectively. Emergency communication gear went into her kit alongside additional survival supplies and defensive equipment that violated regulations about unauthorized personal modifications to standard issue materials. Her workspace received unofficial upgrades disguised as routine equipment improvements. Maya worked with Torres during off-duty hours, installing additional monitoring capabilities and analytical software that could process intelligence data more effectively than standard maintenance systems that weren't designed for comprehensive threat assessment activities. The modifications violated several policies about unauthorized system alterations and exceeded the approved capabilities for technical workstations. But Maya understood that effective intelligence analysis often required resources that hadn't been officially authorized for personnel who weren't recognized as qualified to conduct such analysis within established organizational frameworks. Torres proved to be Maya's most reliable ally, sharing concerns about increased security incidents without questioning Maya's competence or suggesting that her analytical activities represented symptoms of psychological stress or professional boundary confusion. The experienced technician had served multiple deployments and possessed enough practical experience to recognize genuine threats despite official assurances about the routine nature of current surveillance operations. "Sergeant, I've been tracking incident reports from other installations," Torres said during one of their late-night analytical sessions. "Security breaches are up significantly across all facilities involved in counterterrorism operations. Either our adversaries are getting more aggressive, or they're testing our defensive capabilities for something bigger." Maya nodded grimly, appreciating Torres's practical approach to threat evaluation that focused on observable patterns rather than institutional assumptions about terrorist capabilities and coordination levels. Both possibilities suggest systematic preparation for major operations, while our intelligence apparatus maintains assessment frameworks that weren't designed to address professional terrorist networks with sophisticated planning capabilities. Torres helped install additional analytical software that would normally require authorization from intelligence personnel and formal approval procedures that could take months to complete. The enhanced capabilities would affect system performance and data processing efficiency, but Maya calculated that analytical accuracy outweighed procedural compliance when dealing with intelligence that indicated imminent attacks against civilian targets. Maya's analytical training intensified during off-duty periods as she practiced intelligence evaluation techniques that weren't part of standard maintenance specialist curriculum. She spent hours reviewing case studies of previous terrorist operations, studying coordination patterns and operational methodologies that professional networks had used to execute successful attacks against hardened targets. Communication analysis, operational security assessment, behavioral pattern recognition. Analytical techniques that would never be required during routine equipment maintenance, but could become essential when maintenance personnel identified intelligence that professional analysts had failed to recognize or adequately assess within established institutional frameworks. The base training officer, Major David Collins, noticed Maya's increased study time and requested informal consultation about professional development activities that seemed to exceed the scope of technical specialist responsibilities and suggested interest in career fields that required different types of training and security clearances. Maya met with Collins in his office, recognizing another attempt to redirect her analytical activities toward more appropriate technical focuses while discouraging expansion into intelligence analysis that exceeded her organizational role and formal qualifications within the military specialization system. "Sergeant Chen, your professional development activities have expanded significantly beyond standard technical training requirements," Collins observed, reviewing Maya's training records with the concerned expression of someone evaluating whether subordinate personnel were developing unrealistic career expectations. Extensive intelligence analysis training typically indicates interest in career changes that might not be realistic given current specialization and security clearance levels. Maya chose her responses carefully, understanding that any indication of dissatisfaction with current assignments or excessive interest in intelligence careers could be documented and used to justify transfer to positions that would eliminate her access to the intelligence materials she'd been analyzing. Sir, I believe comprehensive system understanding requires familiarity with operational contexts where those systems will be employed. Maintenance effectiveness improves when technical personnel understand how equipment performance affects mission outcomes in various operational scenarios. Collins made notes in Maya's personnel file while maintaining the diplomatic expression of someone trying to provide guidance without creating confrontational situations that could escalate into formal counseling sessions or disciplinary actions that might be unnecessary if the subordinate could be redirected toward more appropriate professional development activities. Sergeant, technical specialists typically don't require extensive knowledge of intelligence analysis or operational planning. Your assigned responsibilities involve equipment maintenance and systems support, activities that function effectively when personnel focus on technical competencies rather than expanding into areas that require different types of training and organizational authorization. Maya's response was measured, avoiding language that could be interpreted as challenging established role boundaries or expressing dissatisfaction with current assignments that might trigger formal action to address attitude problems or career expectation issues. Sir, I prefer to understand all aspects of systems I'm responsible for maintaining rather than limiting knowledge to narrow technical specifications that might not address operational requirements in changing tactical environments. The evaluation concluded without formal recommendations, but Maya understood that her expanded training activities had been documented as potentially indicating role dissatisfaction or unrealistic career expectations that could be used to justify reassignment if her analytical activities continued to attract institutional attention. Maya maintained her intelligence analysis despite institutional pressure to focus on narrower technical responsibilities that didn't overlap with professional specialties that required formal training and appropriate security clearances. Her analytical files continued expanding with evidence of coordinated terrorist activities that official assessments dismissed as coincidental patterns that didn't represent genuine operational coordination. Most importantly, Maya prepared analytically and psychologically for the moment when institutional denial would encounter operational reality. When that confrontation occurred, and her analysis indicated it would occur soon, she would be prepared to respond with capabilities that everyone else had dismissed as exceeding appropriate boundaries for maintenance personnel who didn't understand their proper role in the intelligence community. The warning phase began during Maya's 4th month at Creech, when her analysis revealed that the terrorist coordination had progressed from reconnaissance to active preparation for operational execution. She documented communication spikes between surveillance subjects that coincided with increased activity around major international airports, patterns that indicated final preparation phases for coordinated attacks against civilian aviation targets. Maya compiled her most compelling evidence into a formal intelligence brief, documenting systematic preparation activities that demonstrated professional operational capabilities and sophisticated coordination between cells operating in different countries. The evidence included photographic analysis showing the same vehicles appearing at multiple target locations, communication metadata revealing encrypted exchanges that followed professional operational security protocols, and behavioral analysis indicating counter-surveillance awareness that suggested military-grade training. She requested a meeting with Colonel Richardson himself, understanding that direct appeal to command authority represented her final opportunity to present intelligence that could prevent catastrophic attacks against civilian targets. The operations center hummed with routine activity as duty officers coordinated daily missions across multiple theaters, managing surveillance operations that commanders assumed would continue providing valuable intelligence without encountering significant operational complications. Richardson stood at the Central Planning Board surrounded by combat pilots and operations specialists who deferred to his judgment on matters affecting national security operations conducted through unmanned aerial platforms. His attention focused on mission schedules and target priorities that had been established through official intelligence channels and approved through appropriate command authorities. "Sir," Maya began, approaching the group with her updated intelligence assessment in hand, while recognizing that interrupting senior officers during operational planning could result in immediate disciplinary action if her concerns were deemed inappropriate for her organizational role. "I need to brief you on critical intelligence regarding imminent terrorist operations that could affect civilian aviation security." Richardson looked up from the mission board with an expression that suggested irritation at being interrupted by concerns that should have been addressed through appropriate channels by personnel who understood their proper role in the intelligence hierarchy. His response carried the authority of someone who'd never been wrong about strategic assessments or operational priorities. "Sergeant Chen," Richardson said, his tone indicating that her presence during senior planning sessions was unexpected and potentially inappropriate. "I thought intelligence personnel had already addressed your analytical concerns. Is there something specific about today's maintenance schedule that requires command attention? Or are you here about matters outside your area of responsibility?" The question was designed to establish boundaries while reminding everyone present that maintenance specialists dealt with equipment issues while senior officers handled strategic intelligence and operational planning that affected national security. Maya felt the attention of combat pilots turning toward their conversation, operations personnel pausing their work to observe what would either be a brief clarification or an uncomfortable demonstration of someone exceeding their institutional role. "Sir, the subjects we've been conducting routine surveillance on are actually coordinating major attacks against civilian aviation targets. I have conclusive evidence showing systematic preparation for simultaneous operations that could result in significant casualties if not prevented through immediate interdiction efforts." Maya offered her intelligence brief, watching Richardson's expression as he accepted the folder without opening it, holding it like evidence of fundamental misunderstanding about the difference between equipment maintenance and strategic intelligence analysis that required formal training and appropriate security clearances. Sergeant Richardson began, his voice taking on the patient tone of authority addressing subordinate personnel who'd exceeded their qualifications and needed education about appropriate organizational boundaries. "Let me explain something about intelligence evaluation. It requires specialized training in threat assessment, access to classified information sources, and experience in distinguishing between enemy capabilities and random activities that might appear coordinated to people without proper analytical background." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers, some showing discomfort with witnessing professional boundaries being publicly enforced, while others demonstrated the kind of institutional loyalty that supported command decisions, even when they involved dismissing concerns from subordinate personnel who might have legitimate observations to contribute. Richardson continued his explanation with authoritative confidence that indicated certainty about the correctness of existing intelligence assessments and the inappropriateness of challenges from personnel who lacked qualifications to conduct strategic analysis. "The subjects you've been tracking represent routine surveillance targets engaged in activities that occasionally intersect with persons of interest to counterterrorism agencies. If there were genuine coordination for major operations, it would be identified and neutralized by intelligence professionals who specialize in exactly these types of threat assessments and have access to information sources that provide complete operational pictures." Maya felt her professional composure beginning to erode under the weight of institutional dismissal that refused to consider evidence that contradicted established assessments. Her combat experience had taught her to recognize preparation patterns that indicated imminent enemy action, but that experience was being dismissed as irrelevant to intelligence analysis that required different types of expertise. "Sir, respectfully, I've documented systematic reconnaissance activities, professional operational security protocols, and coordination patterns that indicate these subjects possess training and capabilities that exceed routine surveillance assessments. The timing suggests operational execution within days, rather than continued preparation activities." Richardson interrupted with authority that established absolute boundaries around intelligence evaluation and the qualifications required to conduct such analysis within military organizational structures that depended on role specialization and appropriate security clearances. "Sergeant Chen, are you suggesting that intelligence professionals with years of specialized training and access to classified information sources have missed obvious patterns that are apparent to maintenance personnel? Are you questioning the competence of people who've devoted their careers to understanding terrorist capabilities and preventing exactly the types of attacks you're describing?" The silence that followed was electric and dangerous. Maya realized she'd crossed institutional lines by challenging not just Richardson's authority, but the entire intelligence apparatus that kept military operations secure and effective. Everyone in the operations center understood the implications of this confrontation, where a maintenance specialist was publicly questioning intelligence assessments made by qualified professionals. "No, sir," Maya said carefully, recognizing that any further challenge to institutional competence could result in immediate disciplinary action that would eliminate her ability to continue monitoring the intelligence that indicated imminent attacks. I'm reporting observations from someone who's been tracking systematic changes in subject behavior that suggest transition from reconnaissance to operational preparation phases. Richardson handed her folder back without examination, the gesture carrying more dismissal than any verbal response could convey. His action demonstrated absolute confidence in existing intelligence assessments and complete dismissal of analytical contributions from personnel who exceeded their organizational role by conducting intelligence analysis without appropriate qualifications. Sergeant Chen, your attention to detail is appropriate for equipment maintenance, but intelligence analysis requires access to signals intelligence, human intelligence, and satellite reconnaissance that provides complete tactical pictures rather than isolated observations. What appears to be systematic coordination might actually be coincidental activities that happen to occur in similar timeframes without representing actual operational collaboration. Maya accepted her folder with hands that remained steady despite the humiliation of public dismissal and the growing certainty that her warnings about imminent attacks were being ignored by people who would be responsible for explaining intelligence failures after civilian casualties had been suffered. Richardson turned back to the mission planning board, already shifting attention to matters that required command decisions rather than concerns from maintenance personnel who'd exceeded their appropriate role in intelligence evaluation. His voice carried renewed authority as he resumed operational planning that assumed existing threat assessments were accurate and comprehensive. As Maya reached the exit, she heard Richardson announce mission priorities with confidence that suggested no awareness of threats beyond those identified through official intelligence channels that had dismissed systematic terrorist coordination as routine surveillance activities requiring continued monitoring rather than immediate interdiction efforts. Maya's persistence evolved into a problem that demanded administrative solutions. Word spread through the close-knit community of intelligence professionals that the maintenance specialist was promoting analytical theories that contradicted official threat assessments and challenged the competence of personnel responsible for counterterrorism operations. What had begun as professional disagreement developed into institutional resistance to someone who was exceeding appropriate boundaries and demonstrating fundamental misunderstanding of her role. Major James Bradley cornered Maya in the technical section break room 3 days after her meeting with Richardson. His approach carried the casual authority of someone delivering unofficial guidance from senior command about appropriate behavior expectations and the consequences of continued boundary violations. Bradley flew reconnaissance missions for special operations and wore decorations that marked him as qualified for sensitive assignments requiring discretion and judgment. He spoke with confidence that came from never being dismissed or marginalized for exceeding institutional expectations about appropriate roles and responsibilities. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Heard you've been playing intelligence analyst again, Chen, Bradley said, settling into the chair across from her with territorial familiarity that established his authority to address subordinate personnel about professional behavior that might be affecting unit morale and operational effectiveness. Making noise about terrorist coordination theories and threat assessments that contradict official intelligence evaluations. Some people are wondering if maintenance duties affecting your judgment about appropriate responsibilities and professional boundaries. Maya looked up from her technical manual, recognizing the opening phase of institutional pressure designed to eliminate challenges to intelligence assessments by addressing the person raising concerns rather than examining the validity of those concerns through objective analytical review. Just reporting observations, Major, Maya replied carefully, understanding that any indication of defensive attitude or unwillingness to accept guidance could escalate informal counseling into formal disciplinary action that would permanently affect her career and security clearance status. Bradley laughed with humor that carried no warmth, the kind of dismissive response that maintained hierarchical relationships while indicating that continued resistance would result in more direct institutional action to address attitude problems. Observations, Bradley repeated with obvious skepticism. That's interesting coming from someone whose job involves equipment calibration rather than strategic intelligence analysis. You've been studying these surveillance subjects so intensively that you're starting to see coordination patterns in routine activities. Maybe it's time to request some leave, clear your head, before you start seeing terrorist conspiracies and maintenance schedules. The suggestion represented more than casual advice between colleagues. Maya understood that her continued warnings were being reframed as symptoms of stress-related paranoia, psychological deterioration that could justify removal from sensitive positions through medical channels, that would be more bureaucratically convenient than formal disciplinary action for exceeding appropriate organizational boundaries. Maya attempted alternative approaches during the following week, requesting meetings with the base chaplain and medical officer to report her intelligence concerns through channels that might carry more credibility with command authority than direct challenges to intelligence assessments that had already been dismissed as exceeding her qualifications. Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel David Hayes listened to Maya's intelligence briefing with pastoral attention, reviewing her documentation while maintaining the concerned expression of someone accustomed to counseling personnel under stress, who sometimes developed obsessive concerns about matters outside their control or area of responsibility. "Sergeant, this is clearly weighing heavily on your conscience," Hayes said after Maya completed her presentation, "but I'm wondering if your concerns might be rooted in anxiety about matters that are being handled appropriately by qualified personnel rather than genuine intelligence indicators that require action." The conversation had shifted from intelligence evaluation to psychological assessment, reducing Maya's professional observations to emotional responses that required pastoral care rather than analytical attention from people responsible for threat evaluation and operational planning. "Sir," Maya replied, recognizing the institutional pattern that transformed intelligence concerns into personal problems requiring counseling rather than official action. "I'm not reporting anxiety or emotional concerns. I'm documenting systematic evidence of terrorist coordination that indicates imminent attacks against civilian aviation targets." Hayes nodded with pastoral understanding that reflected training in addressing personnel who developed excessive investment in matters outside their area of responsibility, situations where military members sometimes created problems for themselves by exceeding appropriate boundaries and developing unrealistic expectations about their ability to contribute to specialized activities. Evidence that's been reviewed by qualified intelligence professionals who found no indication of coordinated threats requiring immediate action, Hayes observed gently. "Sometimes our desire to contribute beyond our assigned roles creates situations where we interpret routine activities as significant patterns that require urgent attention." The response had effectively reframed Maya's intelligence analysis as symptoms of role dissatisfaction and inadequate understanding of appropriate professional boundaries within military organizational structures that depended on specialization and security clearance hierarchies. Maya's meeting with the base medical officer, Captain Lisa Wong, followed similar patterns as her intelligence concerns were evaluated through medical rather than analytical frameworks. Wong listened with clinical attention while internally assessing whether Maya's persistent focus on intelligence matters indicated stress-related conditions that could affect her ability to perform assigned technical duties. "Sergeant Chen, you've been conducting extensive analysis of intelligence materials that aren't really related to your maintenance responsibilities," Wong observed after reviewing Maya's documentation. "Extended focus on threat assessment activities can sometimes indicate hypervigilance related to deployment stress or feelings of disconnection from mission significance." Maya felt the conversation transforming her professional observations into psychological symptoms that required medical evaluation rather than intelligence analyses that demanded operational response. The institutional mechanisms for dismissing inconvenient intelligence had evolved beyond simple authority-based rejection to medical reframing that questioned her psychological fitness rather than addressing the validity of her analytical conclusions. "Ma'am, respectfully, this analysis is based on systematic observation of terrorist activities that demonstrate professional coordination and operational capabilities that exceed official threat assessments. The evidence indicates imminent execution of major attacks against civilian targets." Wong studied Maya with clinical assessment that had been trained to identify stress indicators in military personnel operating under conditions that could compromise judgment and decision-making capabilities. Excessive investment in intelligence analysis by personnel who lack formal training in analytical methodology can create situations where random events appear to represent coordinated threats requiring urgent action. The medical evaluation concluded without formal intervention, but Maya understood that her analytical activities had been documented as potentially symptomatic of deployment-related stress that could justify future action if her intelligence concerns continued to challenge official assessments and create problems for command authority. Every institutional channel had been systematically closed to Maya's intelligence concerns, while her warnings were reframed as evidence of psychological instability, professional boundary confusion, or stress-related paranoia that required treatment rather than operational response. Her analysis of imminent terrorist attacks had been transformed into personal problems that reflected inadequate adjustment to her assigned role within military organizational structures. Maya's warnings became the subject of systematic institutional resistance that extended beyond simple dismissal into active measures designed to neutralize her influence and discredit her analytical capabilities. Word had spread through multiple levels of command that a maintenance specialist was challenging intelligence assessments and creating disruption within operational planning processes that depended on confidence in official threat evaluations. The resistance manifested through subtle but coordinated efforts to isolate Maya from information sources and limit her access to intelligence materials that weren't directly related to her technical responsibilities. Her computer access was restricted to maintenance databases and equipment specifications, eliminating her ability to review surveillance footage and communication intercepts that had formed the foundation of her terrorist coordination analysis. Master Sergeant Robert Kim approached Maya during a routine shift briefing with instructions that carried the weight of formal command directive disguised as operational security enhancement. His delivery was professional but unmistakably final, indicating that further discussion or appeal would be inappropriate and potentially career-threatening. Chen, effective immediately, your workstation access is being modified to reflect appropriate security boundaries for technical personnel, Kim announced, while reviewing an authorization form that had been signed by multiple levels of command authority. Intelligence materials will be restricted to information directly relevant to equipment maintenance and system support activities. Maya recognized the institutional mechanism being employed to eliminate her ability to continue analytical activities that had been deemed inappropriate for someone in her organizational position. The access restrictions would prevent her from monitoring the terrorist subjects she'd been tracking while maintaining the appearance of routine security protocol adjustments rather than punitive action against someone who'd exceeded appropriate boundaries. Sergeant, Maya replied carefully, understanding that any challenge to the new restrictions could be interpreted as resistance to legitimate security measures designed to protect classified information from personnel who lacked appropriate clearances for intelligence analysis activities. May I ask what operational requirements necessitated these access modifications? Kim consulted his authorization documents with the expression of someone implementing orders that had been carefully crafted to withstand scrutiny while achieving specific objectives regarding personnel who'd become problematic for institutional decision-making processes. The modifications reflect updated security protocols for technical specialists who don't require intelligence access for their assigned maintenance responsibilities. Your duties involve equipment calibration and system support rather than intelligence analysis, so restricting access to non-essential materials actually enhances operational security while ensuring personnel focus on their appropriate specializations. The explanation was bureaucratically sound while effectively eliminating Maya's ability to continue tracking the terrorist coordination that she'd identified through months of analytical work. Her intelligence-gathering capabilities had been neutralized through administrative action that couldn't be challenged without appearing to resist legitimate security measures. Maya's informal support network within the technical section began experiencing similar institutional pressure as command authorities sought to prevent the spread of analytical theories that contradicted official intelligence assessments. Torres found herself transferred to different shift schedules that eliminated her collaboration opportunities with Maya, while other technical specialists received informal guidance about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez approached Maya during equipment maintenance, with the uncomfortable expression of someone delivering unwelcome information about institutional decisions that would affect their working relationship and professional collaboration opportunities. Chen, I've been advised that technical personnel should focus on equipment responsibilities rather than intelligence analysis activities that might create confusion about our appropriate role in operational planning, Rodriguez said, while reviewing maintenance schedules that had been modified to limit Maya's access to systems that processed intelligence data. Maya understood that Rodriguez was communicating institutional pressure that had been applied throughout the technical section to discourage analytical collaboration and ensure that maintenance personnel remained focused on narrowly defined responsibilities that didn't overlap with intelligence specialties. The message was clear without being explicitly threatening. Technical specialists who supported Maya's analytical activities would face similar institutional responses, designed to redirect their professional focus toward appropriate duties, while discouraging expansion into intelligence analysis that exceeded their organizational qualifications and security clearances. Maya's shift assignments were modified to eliminate her contact with intelligence materials during periods when surveillance data was being processed and analyzed by qualified personnel. Her work schedule was restructured to focus on equipment maintenance during hours when operational planning activities weren't being conducted, ensuring that she couldn't observe intelligence processing that might encourage continued analytical activities. Captain Jennifer Walsh delivered the schedule modifications with professional courtesy that masked the deliberate nature of institutional efforts to limit Maya's exposure to intelligence operations while maintaining the appearance of routine administrative adjustments rather than punitive action against someone who'd challenged official assessments. Sergeant Chen, your maintenance schedule is being optimized to focus on equipment servicing during periods when systems aren't actively processing sensitive intelligence materials, Walsh explained while reviewing duty rosters that had been carefully designed to achieve specific objectives regarding personnel management and operational security. Maya recognized that her access to intelligence operations was being systematically eliminated through schedule modifications that would prevent her from continuing to monitor terrorist coordination patterns while maintaining institutional plausible deniability about the punitive nature of these administrative changes. The isolation extended beyond access restrictions into social and professional marginalization within the intelligence community at Creech. Officers who had previously maintained cordial working relationships began avoiding interaction with Maya, understanding that association with someone who'd challenged institutional competence could affect their own career advancement and professional reputation. Major Patricia Hawkins, who had initially dismissed Maya's intelligence analysis through official channels, now avoided any contact that might suggest ongoing discussion of intelligence matters with personnel who'd been identified as exceeding appropriate boundaries. Her behavior reflected institutional guidance about maintaining professional distance from subordinates, who demonstrated poor judgment about their organizational role. Maya found herself eating alone in dining facilities where intelligence personnel had previously included technical specialists in informal discussions about operational activities. The social isolation was systematic and deliberate, designed to reinforce institutional boundaries while discouraging continued analytical activities through peer pressure and professional marginalization. The institutional response escalated to formal documentation when Maya attempted to present her updated intelligence analysis through the base suggestion system, hoping that official channels for personnel recommendations might provide alternative means for communicating urgent threat information to decision-makers who could authorize appropriate responses. Captain Stephen Murphy, the Base Suggestion Program Coordinator, reviewed Maya's submission with obvious discomfort as he recognized that her intelligence concerns had already been addressed through multiple official channels, and that further pursuit of these matters could be interpreted as insubordination or failure to accept command decisions. Sergeant Chen, your suggestion has been reviewed by appropriate personnel, Murphy said while returning her documentation without forwarding it through normal evaluation procedures. However, suggestions regarding intelligence assessments and operational planning fall outside the scope of the personnel recommendation system, which is designed to address administrative improvements and equipment concerns rather than strategic matters. Maya understood that every formal channel for presenting intelligence concerns had been systematically closed, while her attempts to communicate urgent threat information were being reframed as inappropriate use of administrative systems by someone who refused to accept institutional decisions about her analytical qualifications and appropriate responsibilities. The psychological pressure intensified through informal counseling sessions that were presented as career guidance but functioned as institutional mechanisms for modifying behavior that had been deemed problematic for unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Maya found herself meeting with senior non-commissioned officers who delivered carefully crafted messages about professional development and career expectations. First Sergeant William Clark approached these discussions with the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing personnel issues and understood how to redirect subordinate behavior without creating confrontational situations that might escalate into formal disciplinary proceedings. Chen, you've got solid technical skills and good attention to detail, Clark observed during one of these sessions, but you seem to be developing interests in areas that aren't really aligned with career advancement opportunities for technical specialists. Intelligence analysis requires different types of training and security clearances that aren't available through maintenance career fields. Maya recognized the institutional strategy of redirecting her professional ambitions toward more appropriate channels while discouraging continued intelligence activities that had been deemed excessive for her organizational position. The guidance was presented as helpful career counseling rather than corrective action for someone who'd exceeded institutional boundaries. The administrative pressure culminated in formal performance counseling that documented Maya's tendency to exceed appropriate role boundaries while engaging in activities that weren't related to her assigned responsibilities. The counseling session was conducted by her immediate supervisor and witnessed by senior personnel who could verify that appropriate guidance had been provided. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez delivered the formal counseling with professional objectivity that masked his personal discomfort with institutional efforts to suppress intelligence analysis that might have legitimate value for operational security and threat assessment activities. Sergeant Chen, this counseling addresses concerns about your tendency to engage in intelligence analysis activities that exceed your designated responsibilities and appropriate security clearances. Rodriguez read from prepared documentation that had been crafted to withstand legal scrutiny while achieving specific objectives regarding personnel behavior modification. Maya listened to formal documentation of her analytical activities being characterized as performance deficiencies that demonstrated poor judgment about professional boundaries and inadequate understanding of her organizational role within military specialization hierarchies that depended on role clarity and appropriate limitation of responsibilities. The counseling documentation would remain in her personnel file as evidence of guidance provided regarding appropriate professional behavior, creating institutional protection against claims that command authority had failed to address performance issues through proper administrative channels before taking more serious disciplinary action. Maya's technical workspace was relocated to an isolated section of the maintenance facility, where she would have minimal contact with intelligence operations and limited access to personnel who might encourage continued analytical activities. The relocation was presented as operational efficiency improvement rather than isolation of someone who'd become problematic for institutional decision-making processes. The new workspace lacked computer terminals that could access intelligence databases, and was positioned away from communication systems that processed classified information relevant to counterterrorism operations. Maya found herself conducting equipment maintenance in relative isolation, while the terrorist coordination she'd identified continued developing toward operational execution. Senior personnel began conducting informal interviews with technical specialists who had worked closely with Maya, seeking information about the extent of her analytical activities and identifying other personnel who might have been influenced by her intelligence theories that contradicted official assessments. Master Sergeant Lisa Thompson approached these interviews with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting damage assessment regarding institutional security and the potential spread of unauthorized analytical activities within technical sections that weren't supposed to conduct intelligence evaluation. The interviews created an atmosphere of suspicion and caution within the technical community, as specialists understood that association with Maya's analytical activities could result in similar institutional responses designed to redirect their professional focus toward more appropriate responsibilities. Maya's security clearance came under review through routine periodic investigation procedures that had been expedited to assess her suitability for continued access to classified materials, given her tendency to exceed appropriate boundaries in intelligence analysis activities. The review process would examine her psychological fitness and professional judgment regarding institutional authority and role limitations. The clearance investigation included interviews with colleagues, supervisors, and mental health professionals who had interacted with Maya during her analytical activities. The investigation would determine whether her intelligence concerns represented legitimate observations or symptoms of psychological conditions that could compromise her reliability for continued access to sensitive information. Maya understood that the clearance review represented the final institutional mechanism for eliminating her ability to continue intelligence analysis while maintaining the appearance of routine security procedures rather than punitive action against someone who'd challenged official threat assessments. Every aspect of her professional environment had been systematically modified to prevent continued analytical activities while maintaining institutional plausible deniability about the deliberate nature of these administrative changes. Maya found herself isolated from intelligence operations and subjected to formal documentation that characterized her analytical expertise as performance deficiencies requiring correction. The terrorist coordination continued developing toward operational execution while the intelligence apparatus designed to detect and prevent such threats focused on neutralizing internal challenges to their analytical competence rather than examining the validity of warnings that had been systematically dismissed through institutional mechanisms designed to protect organizational authority from subordinate scrutiny. Maya realized that institutional resistance to her intelligence analysis had become more important to command authority than the terrorist threats she'd identified, creating situations where organizational protection superseded operational security and where preserving institutional credibility mattered more than preventing civilian casualties through effective threat assessment and interdiction activities. Maya's isolation became complete as institutional mechanisms transformed her from a valued technical specialist into a problematic individual whose continued presence threatened organizational stability and command confidence. The systematic exclusion extended beyond administrative restrictions into comprehensive marginalization, designed to eliminate her influence while serving as an example to other personnel who might consider exceeding appropriate boundaries. The final phase of institutional pressure arrived through formal notification that Maya's analytical activities had been deemed incompatible with her assigned responsibilities, and that continued engagement in intelligence analysis could result in disciplinary action affecting her military career and security clearance status. The notification was delivered by Colonel Richardson himself, emphasizing the seriousness of institutional concerns about her professional behavior. Sergeant Chen Richardson said during a formal meeting that included her immediate supervisor and the base legal advisor as witnesses to ensure proper documentation of command guidance regarding appropriate role boundaries. Your persistent engagement in intelligence analysis activities despite clear guidance about role limitations has created concerns about your understanding of appropriate professional boundaries and institutional authority. Maya sat at attention while listening to formal characterization of her intelligence expertise as insubordination and failure to accept lawful orders regarding the scope of her assigned responsibilities. The meeting represented final institutional effort to modify her behavior before implementing administrative action that could permanently affect her military career. Richardson continued with authority that brooked no discussion or appeal, reading from prepared documentation that had been reviewed by legal personnel to ensure compliance with military justice procedures while achieving specific objectives regarding personnel behavior modification. Intelligence analysis requires specialized training, appropriate security clearances, and institutional authorization that you do not possess. Your continued attempts to engage in analytical activities that exceed your qualifications constitute insubordination and demonstrate fundamental misunderstanding of military organizational structure and command authority. The formal reprimand was designed to create legal foundation for future disciplinary action, while providing Maya with final opportunity to modify her behavior and accept appropriate limitations on her professional activities. Any continued intelligence analysis would be documented as willful disobedience of direct orders from lawful command authority. Maya understood that institutional resistance had evolved into direct threat to her military career, and that continued pursuit of her intelligence concerns would result in formal charges that could end her service and eliminate her security clearance permanently. The choice was stark: abandon her analysis of imminent terrorist threats, or face career destruction through military justice proceedings. "Yes, sir," Maya replied carefully, recognizing that any indication of continued resistance could trigger immediate disciplinary action that would prevent her from accessing any intelligence materials or maintaining any capability to monitor the terrorist coordination that she'd identified through months of analytical work. Richardson dismissed her with final warning that emphasized absolute nature of institutional expectations regarding role compliance and the consequences of continued boundary violations. Maya left the meeting understanding that she had been effectively silenced through institutional mechanisms that prioritized organizational authority over operational security and threat assessment accuracy. The isolation deepened as Maya found herself completely cut off from intelligence operations and surveillance activities that had previously provided information about terrorist coordination patterns. Her workspace had been relocated to equipment storage areas where she conducted routine maintenance tasks that provided no access to intelligence processing or analytical activities. Technical specialists who had previously collaborated with Maya began treating her with professional distance that reflected institutional guidance about avoiding association with personnel who had been identified as problematic for organizational stability. The social isolation was systematic and comprehensive, designed to reinforce her marginalized status while discouraging other personnel from engaging in similar analytical activities. Staff Sergeant Torres approached Maya during a routine maintenance task with obvious discomfort as she delivered information about additional administrative changes that would further limit Maya's access to intelligence materials and operational information. Chen, I've been instructed to inform you that technical personnel will no longer have access to surveillance footage or intelligence briefings that aren't directly related to specific equipment maintenance requirements, Torres said while avoiding eye contact that might suggest continued support for Maya's analytical activities. Maya recognized that Torres was being used to communicate institutional decisions that would eliminate any remaining opportunities for intelligence gathering, while maintaining the appearance of routine security protocol adjustments rather than punitive measures against someone who challenged official assessments. The administrative changes represented comprehensive effort to ensure that Maya could not continue monitoring terrorist activities or gathering information that might support her analytical conclusions about coordinated threats against civilian aviation targets. Her intelligence-gathering capabilities had been systematically dismantled through bureaucratic mechanisms that couldn't be challenged without appearing to resist legitimate security measures. Maya's quarters were subjected to routine security inspection that focused on identifying unauthorized materials related to intelligence analysis activities. The inspection was conducted by security personnel who documented possession of analytical materials that exceeded appropriate security boundaries for technical specialists without formal intelligence clearances. Security specialist Amanda Foster conducted the inspection with professional thoroughness that masked the targeted nature of investigation, designed to identify and confiscate materials that could support continued analytical activities by someone who'd been deemed problematic for institutional authority and operational security. Sergeant Chen, regulations require that classified materials be secured according to appropriate protocols for personnel with designated security clearances, Foster explained while photographing analytical charts and intelligence documentation that Maya had accumulated during months of unauthorized analysis activities. Maya watched her intelligence analysis being classified as unauthorized possession of materials that exceeded her security clearance level, creating potential grounds for formal security violations that could justify additional disciplinary action and permanent revocation of her access to classified information systems. The confiscation eliminated her ability to reference previous analytical work or continue tracking terrorist coordination patterns that had formed the foundation of her threat assessment regarding imminent attacks against civilian aviation infrastructure. Her months of intelligence gathering had been systematically destroyed through administrative action disguised as routine security compliance enforcement. Maya's performance evaluations were modified to reflect concerns about her tendency to exceed appropriate role boundaries and engage in activities that weren't aligned with her assigned responsibilities or institutional expectations for technical specialists within military organizational hierarchies. First Sergeant Clark delivered the modified evaluation with professional objectivity that masked the deliberate nature of institutional efforts to create documented foundation for future administrative action against personnel who challenged official intelligence assessments or exceeded appropriate organizational boundaries. Chen, your technical performance remains satisfactory, but concerns have been noted regarding your tendency to engage in activities outside your area of responsibility and your apparent difficulty accepting guidance about appropriate professional boundaries, Clark read from evaluation documentation that would become permanent part of Maya's military record. Maya understood that the performance evaluation was designed to create legal foundation for future disciplinary action, while characterizing her intelligence expertise as performance deficiency that demonstrated poor judgment about institutional authority and appropriate role limitations within military specialization systems. The evaluation would affect her eligibility for promotion, assignment to specialized positions, and access to training opportunities that might enhance her analytical capabilities or provide alternative channels for intelligence analysis activities. Her career advancement had been systematically compromised through administrative mechanisms that punished challenges to institutional competence. Maya's medical records were reviewed as part of comprehensive assessment of her psychological fitness for continued military service and access to classified materials. The review examined her interactions with mental health professionals and documented concerns about her persistent focus on intelligence analysis activities that exceeded her organizational role. Captain Rebecca Morrison conducted psychological evaluation that focused on Maya's understanding of appropriate professional boundaries and her acceptance of institutional authority regarding role limitations and security clearance restrictions that determined access to intelligence materials and analytical activities. Sergeant Chen, your persistent engagement in intelligence analysis despite clear guidance about role boundaries suggests possible difficulty accepting institutional authority and appropriate limitations on professional activities, Morrison observed while documenting psychological assessment that could justify future administrative action. Maya recognized that psychological evaluation was being used to create medical foundation for characterizing her intelligence concerns as symptoms of psychological conditions that compromised her reliability for continued access to classified materials and sensitive operational information. The psychological assessment would become part of her permanent medical record and could be used to justify administrative separation from military service or revocation of security clearances that enabled access to intelligence materials relevant to counterterrorism operations and threat assessment activities. Maya's final appeal came through the base chaplain, representing her last attempt to communicate intelligence concerns through institutional channels that might provide alternative access to command authority without triggering additional disciplinary action for continued insubordination regarding role boundaries. Chaplain Hayes listened to Maya's abbreviated intelligence summary with pastoral concern that reflected his understanding of institutional pressure being applied to eliminate her analytical activities while maintaining appearance of appropriate personnel management rather than suppression of legitimate intelligence concerns. Sergeant, I understand your concerns about potential threats, but I'm not qualified to evaluate intelligence matters that have already been reviewed by appropriate professionals, Hayes said after examining documentation that Maya had managed to preserve despite security confiscation of her analytical materials. Maya realized that even religious channels for addressing moral concerns about institutional failures had been effectively closed through systematic isolation that prevented any communication of intelligence warnings to personnel who might have authority to authorize appropriate responses to terrorist threats. The chaplain's response reflected institutional guidance about maintaining appropriate boundaries between religious counsel and intelligence evaluation, ensuring that Maya's concerns would be characterized as personal spiritual issues rather than operational intelligence that demanded command attention and potential modification of official threat assessments. Maya's military occupational specialty came under review as part of comprehensive assessment of her suitability for continued assignment to positions that required access to classified materials and intelligence operations. The review examined whether her analytical tendencies were compatible with technical specialist roles that required focus on equipment maintenance rather than strategic intelligence evaluation. Personnel Specialist Major David Chen conducted the occupational review with professional attention to regulatory requirements, while implementing institutional decisions about Maya's continued assignment to positions that provided access to intelligence materials and operational information relevant to counterterrorism activities. Sergeant Chen, your performance in technical specialties has been satisfactory, but concerns about role boundary issues suggest possible incompatibility with positions that require access to classified intelligence materials, Chen explained while reviewing occupational standards that could justify reassignment to positions with reduced security clearance requirements. Maya understood that occupational review represented final institutional mechanism for eliminating her access to intelligence operations, while maintaining the appearance of routine personnel management decisions based on performance evaluation and security clearance assessments rather than punitive action against someone who'd challenged official intelligence competence. The review could result in reassignment to positions that eliminated her access to intelligence materials and operational information, effectively ending her ability to monitor terrorist activities or contribute analytical expertise to threat assessment activities within military organizational structures. Maya's institutional isolation became absolute, as every formal and informal channel for intelligence communication was systematically closed through administrative mechanisms that prioritized organizational authority over operational security and threat assessment accuracy. Her expertise had been transformed from valuable analytical capability into institutional liability that required elimination through career destruction. The terrorist coordination continued developing toward operational execution while the intelligence apparatus designed to detect and prevent such threats focused on neutralizing internal challenges to analytical competence rather than examining the validity of warnings that had been dismissed through systematic institutional mechanisms designed to protect organizational credibility from subordinate scrutiny. Maya found herself completely marginalized within the intelligence community, isolated from information sources, and subjected to comprehensive institutional pressure designed to eliminate her analytical capabilities, while serving as warning to other personnel who might consider exceeding appropriate boundaries or challenging official assessments of terrorist threats and coordination capabilities. The institutional victory was complete, But the terrorist threats remained unaddressed as organizational protection superseded operational security, and command authority proved more important than preventing civilian casualties through effective intelligence analysis and threat interdiction activities that might have prevented coordinated attacks against aviation targets. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya prepared psychologically for the reality that institutional mechanisms had proven more effective at suppressing intelligence analysis than terrorist networks had been at concealing their operational preparations, creating situations where organizational loyalty mattered more than national security, and where preserving command credibility took precedence over protecting civilian populations from coordinated terrorist attacks. The crisis began at 0523 hours on a Wednesday morning that had started like every other routine surveillance shift. Maya was conducting routine equipment diagnostics in her isolated workspace when the first emergency transmission crackled through the base communication system, cutting through the pre-dawn quiet with desperate urgency that immediately commanded attention from everyone within range of the radio networks. Base. Emergency. Emergency. This is Delta Flight 447 declaring Mayday. We have multiple hijackers aboard. They appear to be coordinating with ground personnel at Frankfurt International, requesting immediate assistance and emergency protocols. The transmission dissolved into chaotic interference, mixed with sounds of struggle and shouting, leaving behind a silence that felt like the moment before a massive explosion tears through everything believed to be secure and predictable. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos as duty officers scrambled to establish communication with the hijacked airliner while simultaneously attempting to coordinate with international aviation authorities and counterterrorism agencies across multiple time zones. Maya listened to the frantic radio traffic from her isolated position, her hands frozen on diagnostic equipment as she realized that Delta 447 had fallen victim to exactly the coordinated terrorist operation she'd been documenting for months. Additional emergency transmissions followed in rapid succession, creating a cascade of crisis communications that painted a picture of systematic execution matching every pattern Maya had identified in her dismissed intelligence analysis. The scope of coordinated attacks was unfolding exactly as her documentation had predicted, validating analytical conclusions that had been systematically rejected through institutional mechanisms designed to protect organizational authority. This is Lufthansa 892 declaring emergency. Multiple armed individuals have breached cockpit security using sophisticated equipment. Ground control at Munich is reporting suspicious activities around airport perimeter that appear coordinated with aircraft incidents. A British Airways voice joined the emergency frequency with information that confirmed Maya's worst analytical predictions about coordinated timing and professional operational capabilities. Emergency! Emergency! This is Speedbird 203. We have hostile takeover situation aboard aircraft with apparent coordination from ground personnel at Heathrow. Security personnel are reporting simultaneous perimeter breaches at multiple international airports. The terrorist network had executed their coordinated operation with precision that surprised no one except the intelligence officers, who'd spent months refusing to acknowledge the coordination patterns that Maya had documented through unauthorized analysis conducted during off-duty hours in her quarters. Colonel Richardson's voice cut through the communication chaos as he attempted to coordinate responses that hadn't been planned because the threats had been systematically dismissed by intelligence professionals who insisted that the terrorist subjects lacked coordination capabilities for major operations against civilian aviation infrastructure. All stations, this is base operations. I need immediate situation reports from all intelligence personnel regarding known threats to civilian aviation. Cross-reference current incidents with existing surveillance subjects and provide assessment of terrorist coordination capabilities. The requests revealed the fundamental problem with institutional intelligence analysis that had dismissed Maya's warnings as exceeding appropriate boundaries for maintenance personnel, who supposedly lacked qualifications for strategic threat assessment activities. Intelligence personnel scrambled to provide information about threats they'd characterized as routine surveillance subjects engaged in coincidental activities that didn't represent coordinated operational capabilities. Their assessments had consistently minimized terrorist coordination potential, while dismissing analytical evidence that contradicted institutional assumptions about enemy capabilities and operational sophistication. Major Hawkins's voice joined the coordination network with intelligence assessment that demonstrated the inadequacy of official threat evaluation that had rejected systematic evidence of terrorist coordination in favor of maintaining confidence in institutional analytical competence and organizational decision-making processes. Base Operations Preliminary Intelligence Review indicates that current incidents involve subjects who were classified as routine surveillance targets without significant coordination capabilities. Initial assessment suggests these may be isolated incidents rather than coordinated operations, pending further analysis of terrorist network capabilities. Maya stared at her radio in disbelief as she listened to Hawkins characterize systematic terrorist coordination as isolated incidents, while multiple aircraft were simultaneously under attack by operatives who demonstrated exactly the professional coordination and operational capabilities that Maya had been documenting through intelligence analysis that had been dismissed as exceeding her organizational qualifications. High actor. Intelligence professionals continued to maintain positions that had already proven catastrophically wrong, refusing to acknowledge coordination patterns that were demonstrating themselves through successful execution of attacks against civilian aviation targets that had been predicted through analytical methods that exceeded appropriate boundaries for maintenance personnel without formal intelligence training. Maya's radio crackled with direct transmission from air traffic control at Frankfurt International Airport, the voice tight with professional desperation as civilian aviation authorities struggled to respond to coordinated attacks that had overwhelmed normal security procedures designed to address individual threats rather than systematic operational coordination. Any military station, this is Frankfurt Control. We have confirmed terrorist coordination across multiple European airports with simultaneous aircraft hijackings and ground security breaches. Initial response protocols have been ineffective against professionally coordinated operations. Request immediate military assistance for counterterrorism operations. She listened to civilian authorities requesting military intervention for terrorist attacks that military intelligence had refused to acknowledge as credible threats, despite analytical evidence that had documented systematic preparation for exactly the types of coordinated operations that were now overwhelming civilian aviation security systems designed for isolated incidents rather than professional terrorist network activities. The scope of institutional intelligence failure was becoming apparent as emergency communications revealed that terrorist coordination exceeded even Maya's analytical predictions, demonstrating operational capabilities that surpassed the patterns she'd identified through surveillance analysis that had been systematically dismissed by intelligence professionals who insisted on maintaining confidence in their threat assessment methodologies. Base operations interrupted emergency communications with Colonel Richardson's voice, carrying command authority mixed with growing awareness that existing intelligence assessments had failed to identify threats that were now manifesting through successful terrorist operations against civilian targets that should have been protected through adequate threat analysis and prevention capabilities. All intelligence personnel report to Operations Center immediately for emergency threat assessment and coordination with international counterterrorism agencies. Previous threat evaluations are being reviewed in light of current terrorist operational capabilities that appear to exceed our analytical projections. Maya switched to discrete emergency frequencies and continued monitoring terrorist coordination communications that her electronic warfare equipment could intercept, understanding that official channels had failed, but her unauthorized analytical capabilities might still contribute to understanding operational scope and coordination methods being employed by terrorist networks. She listened to professional terrorist communications that confirmed every analytical conclusion she'd developed about sophisticated coordination capabilities and operational training that exceeded the assessments provided by intelligence professionals who'd insisted that the subjects lacked capabilities for major coordinated operations against hardened civilian aviation targets. The terrorist coordination demonstrated military-grade communication security and tactical coordination that validated Maya's documentation of professional training and systematic preparation activities that had been dismissed as routine surveillance activities by intelligence officers who refused to acknowledge patterns that contradicted their institutional assumptions about enemy capabilities. Major Fletcher's voice joined the emergency communication network with intelligence assessment that attempted to maintain institutional credibility, despite the obvious failure of threat evaluation processes that had systematically dismissed evidence of coordinated terrorist operations for months. Base Operations Emergency Intelligence Review indicates that terrorist coordination capabilities were more sophisticated than initial assessments suggested. Current incidents appear to involve professional operational training and communication capabilities that weren't apparent through standard intelligence analysis methodologies. Maya listened to Fletcher attempting to explain intelligence failures, without acknowledging that maintenance personnel had identified coordination patterns that professional intelligence officers had systematically dismissed through institutional mechanisms designed to protect analytical competence from challenges by subordinate personnel who exceeded appropriate organizational boundaries. Intelligence professionals began desperately reviewing archived surveillance materials that Maya had been analyzing during her off-duty hours, searching for coordination indicators that they'd missed while focusing on maintaining confidence in threat assessment procedures that hadn't been designed to address professional terrorist networks with sophisticated operational capabilities. Their emergency analysis confirmed every pattern that Maya had documented through unauthorized intelligence gathering activities that had been characterized as exceeding appropriate boundaries for technical specialists who supposedly lacked qualifications for strategic threat assessment and terrorist coordination analysis within established intelligence evaluation frameworks. Emergency communications revealed that civilian casualties were mounting as terrorist operations continued executing coordinated attacks against aviation targets that had been left vulnerable through inadequate threat assessment and intelligence analysis that had systematically underestimated enemy coordination capabilities and operational sophistication. Maya monitored international emergency frequencies that carried reports of successful terrorist operations against airports and aircraft across multiple countries, validating her analytical conclusions about systematic coordination and professional operational capabilities that intelligence professionals had refused to acknowledge despite documentary evidence that had been accumulated through months of unauthorized analysis. The terrorist network had achieved tactical surprise through operational security and coordination capabilities that exceeded official intelligence assessments, demonstrating exactly the professional training and systematic preparation that Maya had identified through pattern recognition methods that had been dismissed as inappropriate for maintenance personnel without formal intelligence qualifications. Frankfurt Control transmitted updated situation reports that revealed the scope of terrorist success against civilian aviation infrastructure that had been left vulnerable through intelligence failures that had consistently minimized coordination threats in favor of maintaining institutional confidence in analytical competence and organizational decision-making processes. Multiple aircraft remain under terrorist control with confirmed coordination between airborne and ground-based operatives. Security personnel report that terrorist ground teams possess detailed knowledge of airport security procedures and emergency response protocols, suggesting extensive reconnaissance and professional operational planning. Maya realized that terrorist operational success had resulted from intelligence failures that had prioritized institutional authority over analytical accuracy, creating vulnerabilities that professional terrorist networks had exploited through coordination capabilities that exceeded the assessments provided by intelligence officers, who'd refused to examine evidence that contradicted their organizational assumptions. The crisis communications continued, revealing systematic terrorist coordination that validated every analytical conclusion Maya had developed through intelligence gathering activities that had been systematically suppressed through institutional mechanisms designed to eliminate challenges to official threat assessments and organizational competence. Emergency response protocols proved inadequate against professionally coordinated terrorist operations that had been planned using intelligence gathered through reconnaissance activities that Maya had identified, but which had been dismissed by intelligence professionals who insisted that the subjects lacked coordination capabilities for major operations against civilian aviation targets. Maya understood that institutional mechanisms designed to protect organizational authority had proven more effective than terrorist operational security, creating intelligence failures that had enabled successful attacks against civilian targets, through systematic dismissal of analytical evidence that could have prevented coordinated operations against aviation infrastructure. The terrorist coordination continued demonstrating professional capabilities while intelligence personnel struggled to respond to threats they'd systematically dismissed, proving that organizational protection had superseded operational security and that preserving institutional credibility had mattered more than preventing civilian casualties through effective threat assessment and interdiction activities. Maya prepared for what she knew would be her final opportunity to contribute analytical capabilities that everyone had dismissed as inappropriate. Understanding that terrorist success had created conditions where institutional resistance might temporarily yield to operational necessity, and where her unauthorized expertise might finally be recognized as essential for understanding enemy coordination methods. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen's story begins with a dramatic hook, revealing how a dismissed maintenance specialist ultimately eliminated a high-value terrorist target with a single precision drone strike during a sandstorm that had grounded all other aircraft. This impossible shot came after 72 hours of institutional resistance from commanders who believed former infantry medics lacked the killer instinct for drone operations. The underestimated expert Maya served as a maintenance specialist at Creech Air Force Base, permanently assigned to equipment calibration and diagnostic testing while Air Force officers commanded the actual combat missions. Despite her combat experience as an Army medic who had saved 17 lives under enemy fire and possessed intuitive battlefield understanding, the assignment boards saw her medical background and classified her as support personnel unsuited for remote killing operations. Her technical coveralls bore no combat patches or pilot wings, making her invisible in a profession where visibility determined advancement. Pattern recognition and early warnings. During her third month at Creech, Maya began noticing anomalies in surveillance footage that analysts dismissed as coincidental. She identified the same vehicles and faces appearing across multiple international locations, following movement patterns suggesting coordination rather than random activity. Working during off-duty hours, Maya analyzed archived footage and discovered systematic terrorist preparation for coordinated attacks against civilian aviation targets. Her analysis revealed professional counter-surveillance awareness, sophisticated communication protocols, and reconnaissance activities at major international airports that indicated imminent coordinated operations. The warning phase Maya compiled comprehensive intelligence briefs documenting terrorist coordination patterns and requested meetings with intelligence officers. Major Patricia Hawkins dismissed her analysis, explaining that intelligence evaluation required specialized training and security clearances that maintenance personnel didn't possess. When Maya persisted, requesting audiences with Colonel Richardson himself, her warnings were characterized as pilot overcautiousness and failure to understand appropriate role boundaries within military organizational structures. Systematic institutional resistance. The institutional response escalated from dismissal to active suppression. Maya's computer access was restricted to maintenance databases, eliminating her ability to review surveillance footage. Her shift schedules were modified to prevent contact with intelligence materials, and her workspace was relocated to isolated equipment storage areas. Performance evaluations documented her, quote, tendency to exceed role boundaries, creating legal foundation for future disciplinary action. Security inspections confiscated her analytical materials as unauthorized possession of classified information. Complete isolation. Maya faced comprehensive marginalization designed to eliminate her influence while serving as an example to other personnel. Technical specialists who had collaborated with her were transferred to different shifts, and informal guidance discouraged association with someone deemed problematic for organizational stability. Psychological evaluations characterized her intelligence concerns as symptoms of deployment stress, while chaplain consultations reframed her warnings as spiritual issues rather than operational intelligence requiring command attention. The crisis arrives at 0523 hours on a Wednesday morning. Emergency transmissions revealed coordinated terrorist attacks against civilian aviation exactly as Maya had predicted. Delta Flight 447 declared Mayday, with multiple hijackers coordinating with ground personnel, followed by similar incidents at Frankfurt, Munich, and Heathrow airports. The scope of systematic coordination validated every pattern Maya had identified, while intelligence professionals scrambled to understand threats they had systematically dismissed for months. On Curl, the impossible mission. As conventional counterterrorism responses failed against professionally coordinated terrorist operations, Maya abandoned her isolated workstation and approached the operations center with portable intelligence equipment she had modified with Torres during unauthorized preparation sessions. Despite direct orders to maintain role boundaries, Maya connected her equipment to communication systems and began a real-time analysis of terrorist coordination traffic that revealed professional command structures coordinating simultaneous attacks across multiple countries. Her unauthorized analysis provided actionable intelligence that official channels couldn't deliver, revealing terrorist network hierarchy and communication protocols that enabled real-time disruption of enemy coordination. International counterterrorism agencies began requesting direct communication with Maya's improvised intelligence station, recognizing that her analysis was more effective than institutional evaluation conducted by personnel with formal training and appropriate security clearances. Vindication and transformation. Maya's real-time intelligence processing revealed terrorist network vulnerabilities that could be exploited through targeted electronic warfare operations. Her equipment identified terrorist command coordination directing simultaneous operations across multiple countries. enabling international agencies to begin disrupting enemy communications and developing targeted responses against network nodes that had been systematically overlooked through official intelligence channels. Emergency response agencies requested permanent assignment of Maya's analytical capabilities to counterterrorism operations, recognizing that her unauthorized expertise provided essential intelligence that official channels couldn't deliver, despite access to classified information sources and professional training that had been deemed superior to maintenance personnel capabilities. Resolution and legacy. 3 months later, Maya stood before the Joint Intelligence Committee at the Pentagon, wearing the Distinguished Intelligence Cross and new rank insignia. The Chen Protocol became standard training for all military personnel regardless of rank or specialty, with her pattern recognition techniques preventing 14 additional terrorist operations and saving over 3,000 civilian lives. Colonel Richardson was reassigned to administrative duties following comprehensive review of systematic intelligence failures, while Major Hawkins faced formal investigation for dismissing actionable intelligence. Maya's new position as Director of Unconventional Threat Analysis came with unprecedented authority to recruit analytical talent from unexpected sources, ensuring valuable intelligence would never again be dismissed due to institutional bias. The terrorist networks she had identified were systematically dismantled through international cooperation guided by her analytical frameworks, while airport security worldwide implemented protocols based on her coordination pattern recognition methods. Maya proved that expertise emerges from dedication and observation rather than rank and credentials, demonstrating that sometimes the most important missions are accomplished by people others dismiss as unqualified. Her story validates the principle that institutional resistance to unconventional thinking can prove more dangerous than enemy operational security, while showing that individual preparation and persistence can overcome organizational denial when civilian lives hang in the balance. 3 months later, Maya stood before the Joint Intelligence Committee at the Pentagon, her uniform now bearing the Distinguished Intelligence Cross and a new rank insignia. The same officials who had dismissed her warnings now sought her expertise for restructuring counterterrorism analysis protocols across all military branches. The Chen Protocol, as intelligence agencies now called her analytical methods, had become standard training for all personnel regardless of rank or specialty. Her pattern recognition techniques had prevented 14 additional terrorist operations and saved over 3,000 civilian lives in coordinated international efforts. Colonel Richardson had been reassigned to administrative duties after a comprehensive review revealed systematic intelligence failures that nearly resulted in catastrophic losses. Major Hawkins faced formal investigation for dismissing actionable intelligence that could have prevented the aviation attacks that shocked the world. Maya's new position as Director of Unconventional Threat Analysis came with unprecedented authority to recruit analytical talent from unexpected sources. Her first initiative established programs that recognized expertise regardless of traditional qualifications, ensuring that valuable intelligence would never again be dismissed due to institutional bias. The terrorist networks she'd identified were systematically dismantled through international cooperation guided by her analytical frameworks. Airport security worldwide implemented protocols based on her coordination pattern recognition, fundamentally changing how authorities detected and prevented coordinated attacks. Maya had proven that the deadliest intelligence often comes from those everyone underestimates, and that preparation combined with persistence could overcome institutional resistance when civilian lives hung in the balance. Her story demonstrates that expertise emerges from dedication and observation rather than rank and credentials, showing that sometimes the most important missions are accomplished by people others dismiss as unqualified. If this story of courage against impossible institutional odds inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of everyday heroes who prove that determination conquers doubt. Share your own experiences of being underestimated in the comments below. You might be featured in our next incredible journey of triumph against all odds.